Russia and Ukraine are accusing each other of planning military action at Europe's largest nuclear facility, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. The Kremlin says it's taking measures to counter the threat of sabotage at the plant, warning that such an attack could have catastrophic consequences. But Ukraine is accusing Russian occupying forces of planting explosives there. Neither side has provided evidence to back their claims.
An ordinary day in the city for the people of Zaporizhzhia. As Kyiv and Moscow trade accusations, they just get on with their daily lives. It's now 16 months since Russian forces captured Europe's largest nuclear power plant just 55 kilometers away, and it's been a focal point of concern ever since. After so much time, those still living here view the potential threat on their doorstep with calmness and stoicism, as well as a readiness to flee if it all comes to the worst.
I personally don't believe that they blow it up, or rather, if they blow up something, it'll be a terror attack intended to scare people. But I don't believe that there'll be a radiation leak.
Yes, I suppose this could pose a threat to my family. I have no idea how bad it can be, but it is a danger. I remember Chernobyl.
I have a small bag prepared with clothes in case I have to throw away the ones I'm wearing, medication and documents I have with me now, and water and some medical face masks. That's it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian actions at the power plant pose a threat to the entire world and called on the global community to take action.
Russia must clearly realize that the world sees the scenarios their terrorists are preparing for and is ready to respond. Radiation is a threat to everybody on the planet, and the nuclear power plant must be fully protected from any radiation incidents.
In turn, Moscow refutes Ukraine's actions that it is staging a false flag event at the plant.
The threat of sabotage by the Kiev regime is indeed great, and its consequences could be catastrophic. The Kiev regime has repeatedly demonstrated its readiness to stop at nothing. Most recently, we saw this during the explosion of the Kharkovka hydroelectric power station, which also had horrific consequences.
As the rhetoric ramps up, the people of Zaporizhzhia can only wait and hope that both sides remain as calm as they are.
Our correspondent Nick Connolly, he was recently very close to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. He has more now on the threat to the site.
Well, firstly, it's a pretty stark picture. If you look across what remains of the big reservoir there at the power station, that reservoir is basically now turned into a desert, so there are real problems about water supply for the cooling facilities. There's also constant issues with power supply. The one main electricity connection to the grid is constantly under attack, under shelling attack, and ends up failing, and then they have to go and use diesel reserve generators until that connection can be re-established. So lots of basically kind of issues, lots of kind of reasons that could actually cause a catastrophic event without much intent, simply because this is a nuclear power station, Europe's biggest nuclear power station, at the heart of a region at war now, with this counteroffensive taking momentum, and there are lots of things that could go wrong. There's also spent nuclear fuel that's just sitting there in containers out on the site, so any kind of, even a small shell that goes the wrong way could lead to huge radioactive leaks, and this is an area with hundreds and thousands of millions of people in the direct vicinity who could be at risk.
And that was GW's Nick Connolly reporting there. I want to bring in now Daria Dolcikova. She is a research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. She's a specialist on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It's good to have you on the program. We have seen a stream of warnings from both Ukraine and Russia about this power plant. Is it possible that we could see a Chernobyl-like or a Fukushima-like disaster at the facility?
Thanks for having me. So I will start out by saying that, first of all, it's quite hard to figure out what would actually happen at the facility in case of an incident. That depends on a number of different variables, a lot of unknowns. It would depend on what the accident actually is, what the incident looks like. I should say that from all of the analysis that I've seen, from my own understanding, a Chernobyl 1986 level disaster is very highly unlikely for a number of different reasons. Fukushima perhaps might be a closer comparison to, I guess, a worst case scenario, but even that, I think we'd have to caveat quite heavily. At the time of the incident at the Fukushima plant, all of the reactors were operational. The reactors at Zaporizhzhia have been shut down for months now. So the risk there is quite a bit, I would say, lower than what we've seen at Fukushima.
Yeah, let me pick up on that. The reactors at Zaporizhzhia have been shut down. So where does the risk come from?
Sure. So the reactors have been shut down. 5 of them are in cold shutdown. 1 of them is in hot shutdown, which basically just means it's being kept at a slightly higher temperature. However, those reactors still contain fuel that's very, very hot. There's also spent fuel on the facility. So that fuel still needs to be cooled down with water. And it does pose the risk of an incident if there was penetration of a containment structure, for instance, or if there was some kind of incident with the reactor with the overheating of that fuel. So yes, they are in shutdown, but there's no, there's still risk there.
We know that nuclear power plants are built with a series of backup safety systems. What do we know about the state of those systems at the Zaporizhzhia facility?
So going back to the Fukushima incident, after the incident at Fukushima in 2011, there was a review of, there was an assessment of the risks to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and an updating of the safety systems to make sure that they were responsive to an emergency. So there are emergency diesel generators on site, a number of them, that are able to keep the plant online in case of a cutoff of external power for several days. We saw that the water has drained out of the Kakhovka reservoir, and yet there are still water supplies and some redundancies in place to keep the fuel cool. So there are systems in place to manage certain emergency situations. But precisely as you say, there are questions around what is the state of those systems. We have some information on how much fuel is available and how much time there is for the generators to work, on what the state of the water is. But the question for me is, if the Russian occupiers decided to engineer an incident at the facility, would they allow those systems to do the work that they need to do to prevent an accident?
Yeah, you bring up a very important point here. We've got Russian forces that are occupying the facility. This plant is inside a war zone. What does all this mean? What would it mean for the emergency response if some radiation leakage did take place?
That's an excellent question. Again, depending on what the incident is, how much radiation leakage there would be, I think that would depend on, the ability to respond. But I mean, just beyond that, this facility is on the front line. So it's very difficult logistically to get things in and out, to get people in and out of the facility as well, particularly as it is still occupied by Russia. So I think that does complicate efforts for a response. And I think that's something we need to be aware of.
Yeah, the IAEA says that it has seen no evidence of explosives planted at the site, but it also says it needs to further assess the situation. Just wondering, let me ask you, I mean, what does that tell you about the level of access that the IAEA has to the site?
So the IAEA is at the facility. It has been for some time now, and I think that's critical that there are eyes on the ground from an international, credible international organization that has the expertise to assess what's happening at the facility. There have been some, as far as we know, limitations to what they can access because they've asked for access to certain parts of the facility. I don't know what the context is for the requests for access to those parts of the facilities, how likely they are to get granted, and where those requests stands at the moment. But some of the parts of the facility that they've asked to access are precisely the parts of the facility where Ukrainian intelligence is saying that there might be explosives in place. So it's critical that they have access to those sites to ensure that there are no explosives there.
Yeah, and we certainly hope no explosion takes place. Daria Dolcikova from the Royal United Services Institute, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.